Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jay, and I'm an alcoholic, and God's doing for me today what I couldn't do for myself because it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday, which is a marvelous day to drink. And I've yet to have a cocktail. And I'd like to again thank Jerry Robbins and David Barge and the people who made it possible, Carol Thornton made it possible, for me to share some of my personal joy with you guys. Somebody yesterday said, I heard that you were the gurus on history, and I went, no, I'm just a queer chap with a strange idea of fun. So, today what I want to share with you is the Akron Miracle. And a lot of times what happens is that if we don't realize exactly where it is we came from, we don't realize just how much of God's grace was necessary in order for Alcoholics Anonymous to be founded. And it is my personal conceit that what happened is that God was calling, and that there were a group of men and women over a period of time who had the faith to listen and to open their hearts and their minds and to follow God's direction. And because they were willing to do that, I'm not drunk today. And it is my great hope that by doing this, I myself remember to spend time in the quiet with an open heart and an open mind. The first thing I want to do today is, again, thank our friend Dick Burns for everything that he has shared with me as far as information about Alcoholics Anonymous. The book that he's got that really is very good about this particular segment is called The Akron Genesis of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then The Oxford Group and Alcoholics Anonymous. What I'd like to do first is to go through a roster of the major players. One of the things that happens sometimes is because I enjoy this stuff so much, I think everybody that I talk to knows who it is that I'm talking about. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the major players, and then we'll go through and actually tell the long story of the Akron Miracle. Okay, our first, for our purposes, since this is about the Oxford Group heritage of Alcoholics Anonymous, I start this with Frank Buckman. And Frank Buckman was a Lutheran minister. He was born in Pennsylvania, and he was the founder of the Oxford Group and of moral rearmament. And he sought to change the world by changing individuals. His coda was, change a man, change a nation, change the world. And Frank is without a doubt the most ambitious person that I've ever heard about. A man who truly believed that if he spoke with enough people and they worked with enough people, that he could actually help change the world. His story is again told in a marvelous book that I must recommend to you called On the Tail of a Comet by Garth Lean. Moral rearmament, which is what the Oxford Group morphed into, is still existent today, and it's got an office in Washington, D.C. Oh yeah, this is a man who met with everyone, just about who is anyone, from the Mahatma Gandhi to the presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens in Europe. The next person that we'd like to talk about today is the Reverend Samuel Moore Shoemaker. The Reverend Sam was Bill Wilson's spiritual director, and he is the man who directly touched all of these folks here: Roland Hazard, Jim Newton, Russell Firestone, Shep Cornell, Ebby Thatcher, and his writings influenced these folks here: Walter Tonks, T. Henry Williams, Henrietta Seiberling, of course, Dr. Bob, and Bill Wilson. He was known as a magnificent life changer. He had a gift of being able to bring an individual to make a decision for Christ and to take them through the steps, the spiritual exercises, which would lead to a spiritual experience. The next person is Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard was Bill's childhood friend who developed a slight drinking problem. And the next person on the list is James D. Newton. James D. Newton was a Oxford group member. And it's through him that the Oxford group actually came to Akron. Russell Firestone was Newton's friend who he worked with and introduced to Sam Shoemaker, and it was his conversion experience that helped bring the Oxford group to Akron. Shep Cornell was a sober, as we would call it sober, but he was a member of the Oxford group that wasn't drinking. He was working with Roland Hazard, and they went and worked with Ebby Thatcher. V.C. Kitchen was the author of one of my favorite books, I Was a Pagan. You know, these guys really knew how to, again, title books. I Was a Pagan, For Sinners Only. You know, this is stuff that I can really identify. A message of depth and weight. Then the Reverend Walter Tonks. He was the Episcopal minister in Akron, Ohio. T. Henry Williams was the developer of a tire mold system that was used by all the different tire manufacturers in the city of Akron. And then Henrietta Seiberling was the daughter-in-law of James D. Seiberling, and Henrietta was the Oxford group member that was very, very close. She was very, very close to Dr. Bob and to Ann Smith. And Robert Holbrook Smith, of course, is Dr. Bob. William D. Silkworth is the doctor who was working at Towns Hospital when Bill kept going in for the belladonna treatment, one of my personal favorites. And then, of course, William Griffith Wilson, who we all know as Bill W. To start this, I'd like to read you the Oxford Group preamble. You cannot belong to the Oxford Group. It has no membership list, subscription, badge rules, or definite location. It is a name for a group of people who, from every rank, profession, and trade in many countries, have surrendered their lives to God and are endeavoring to lead a spiritual quality of life under guidance of the Holy Spirit. The Oxford Group is not a religion. It has no hierarchy, no temples, no endowments. Its workers have no salaries, no plans but God's plan. Every country is their country. Every man is their brother. So, we'll start out in 1908 in Keswick, England. And a Lutheran minister by the name of Frank Buckman has arrived there. He's been on a tour of Europe for about a year. And what's happened is that over that tour of Europe, he has been unable to do what it is that he feels is his greatest mission in life, which is share the message of Christ and get a person to change and make a declaration for Christ. And he's doesn't understand what's going on, and he's sitting in this little chapel, and he's listening to a woman who was a Salvation Army person preach on the cross. And what happened is he saw an I, the letter I, and what came into his heart is that it was his selfishness, it was his egotism that was separating him from God, and that there were certain things that he would not do, and that he had some resentments. And after that, he went and he had some people that he resented who were the board members of a boys' home that he'd worked for, and when these people, good people who had been working in this philanthropic mission, feeding homeless boys and giving them a place to clean up and to study the Bible and the like, they were fed there. And their idea about keeping the thing running is that they ought to cut back on the amount of food the boys should get. Buckman believed that this was the worst thing that could possibly happen. He resigned in a huff. What he did is that he wrote each of these men, confessed his ill will towards him, and the most wonderful thing for him happened the next afternoon. He was taking a walk with a young man, and the young man had exactly what he'd hoped. He got a message of depth and weight. And what Buckman believed is the reason that this young man was able to get a message of depth and weight is that he cleaned his channel out. That he was actually available for God to use. Now, a year later, and actually for a time, there was a young man by the name of Bill Wilson. His father was a tavern owner, and his drinking got in the way of his family life. And he and his wife divorced, and their son Bill was sent to live with the grandparents. And this is in East Dorset, Vermont. And after a time, Bill got old enough, they sent him down to Manchester to go to prep school. And at that prep school, Manchester's a kind of a resort community. He met a lot of people in that town. And the folks that were coming to summer in Manchester, Vermont in those days were people like a Brooklyn doctor by the name of Burnham, who brought his daughter Lois, Ebby Thatcher, whose family, his grandfather had been the mayor of Albany, New York, and Roland Hazard, and Roland's family was the family that owned the Burlington Mills, and is also, I believe you might know, the Allied Chemical Company. That's the Hazard family money. And so these kids were coming in for the summer, and you know, if you've ever spent any time in a resort town, one of the things you need a local to be able to hang out with. You know, and so these guys became friends, and they spent summers together, and they did a lot of things together. And up until the war in 1916, they all kind of went their separate ways, and so they split up. But those friendships, after the war, they came back together and became reacquainted. The next most significant event, I believe, in our lineage is that Buckman now is taking this message of personal conversion, and he feels called to go out and work with other people. And it occurs to him that what he should do in order to have the maximum effect is to teach this to people that are already teaching Christianity to folks. So what he does is he starts going around to missionary communities, and he goes down to China. And when he's in China, he runs across a man by the name of Samuel Moore Shoemaker, who was an ordained Episcopal minister who was doing his missionary work at the time. Sam is in charge of a Bible study for young men. And Sam was a delightful, magnetic, very, very gifted preacher. And he was used to getting his way with people. And what happened is that the conversion rate was not very high. In fact, he'd started out with 30 guys, and he was down to about 11. And he knew the one young man that if this guy bought into Christianity, or at least bought into coming to the meetings, that the rest of the gang would kind of go along with him. So he hears about this life changer, this Frank Buckman guy that's coming through from Pennsylvania, and that's got all these really good stuff. And so what Frank comes and he starts talking with Sam, and Sam says, well, you know, if you'll help me out and go talk to this guy, because this guy will really make it work. And Frank looks at Sam and he says, why isn't he getting the message from you? What's blocking you from transmitting this message? Sam got a little angry. He went home that night and was thinking about, you know, just how he could, you know, get back at Frank. But what happened is that as he reviewed his life, he realized that he'd never completely given himself to God's power, and that he hadn't done the things that Frank was talking about. What happened next is that Sam got together the next morning, and this would be the 19th of January, 1918, with Frank, and he acquainted him with everything that he wished was not true about himself and what it was that he hoped he could become. And he made the list, and the most remarkable thing happened. A couple days later, the young man who he was hoping he could carry the message to the light comes on. And Sam comes to understand that he's cleaned himself up. Something's going on. And there was this thing they called two-way prayer. In other words, that once we get cleaned up, that we can actually hear what it is that goes on. And if you want to know about two-way prayer, the instructions are listed in the 11th step of our big book. It tells you precisely how to go about it. But Sam considered himself to be twice born at this time. And he wrote a book about this experience, and it was called Twice Born Ministers. And what happened is that he was so excited by this that after he got done with his term in Peking a couple months later, he hooked up with Buckman and with H.A. Walter, and later on there were 3 or 4 others, and they went around the missionary world teaching this to other people. In 1925, while Sam's out and about with these guys, what happens is he gets the call, which, if you're working for a hierarchical thing like the Episcopalian Church, they say, it's time, you got to go. And he was given a wonderful job in New York to be the rector of the Calvary Chapel. And so in 1925, he went there. And at the Calvary Chapel, what happened is that he looked around for a venue for the congregation to get involved in missionary work. And there was a piece of property that was available down on East 23rd Street, and he got together with a gentleman by the name of Harry Hadley. Harry Hadley's father, S.H. Hadley, is the man who has the bright light relief of his drink obsession from Jesus that's referred to on page 202 in the Varieties of Religious Experience. And when S.H. Hadley died after years of being sober and working with the Salvation Army, and he had a place called the Galilee Mission in downtown New York, 3 days after he died, his son, who had been a guy with a bad attitude and a drink problem, had a conversion experience. And he went around and did a lot of stuff, and he finally got the message that what he should be doing is maybe just stay in one place instead of traveling around preaching. And he was looking for some place to do this work, and he and Sam hooked up. And so that's how the Calvary Mission got started. While Sam is being rector, he is doing a lot of what he called Oxford Group services at the Calvary Church. And he's busy working with a lot of people, teaching them the Oxford Group steps that we'll go through in a little while. And his friend Frank Buckman introduces him to a young man by the name of James Newton. And James Newton at the time was having a few personal problems, and he was about to make a geographic, and he didn't know what we'd call a geographic, and he didn't know exactly where he was going to go. And so he got together. Frank suggested, go and see Sam. And so he and Sam got together. Sam asked him the same kind of questions that Frank had asked to him. Why is it that you are so blocked up? Why is it that your business career isn't, why your relationships aren't working, all that stuff? And Jim has a spiritual experience, and he goes down to Florida, and he gets involved with his father in a real estate deal. And what they did is they bought the property that was adjacent to the Edison estate, and in between the Edison estate and the Ford estate. And they're doing a subdivision, and they're busy working and trying to get this thing up and running, selling people luxury homes. And while Jim is there, he becomes friendly with a lot of the power players in the country, because at this time in 1927, the zenith of human intelligence, the main guy, is Thomas Edison. This man has changed everybody's way of life through electricity. And one of the things that used to happen when you'd be at the movies, and your Panavision newsreel would come on, every year there was a party at the Edison estate. And the press would ask, well, what's the new invention that's going to, change everything for us this time? And Mr. Edison and say a thing or two, and all the major industrialists and their families were there. It was a big, big deal. And Newton was brought in. He became friendly with the Edisons, and they put him in charge of putting this party on. So he met all of these people, and he's living his life by these spiritual principles. And he's a magnetic person, and people really, really like him. And there's a marvelous, marvelous book called Uncommon Friends that James Newton wrote about, and it's about his life with Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, Alexis Carrel, and Charles Lindbergh. Just a couple hitters. Just a couple. And anyway, Harvey Firestone's at the party. And why don't you show him? Harvey Firestone's at the party. This is Jim. And he really likes this guy. And he knows that the real estate market has kind of taken a dip, and that they're not going to be able to do what they're hoping to do with this property. So he says, I really like you, and I got this son that I was hoping to be something, and I got, some problems with. Would you please come and work for me, and I'll make you my personal assistant? And so Newton says, well, I'll think about it. And he did his quiet time, and he waited for guidance, and he was led to say that, yeah, he'd come. And so in 1928, Jim Newton went to work for Harvey Firestone in Akron, Ohio. Now we got to switch gears a little bit. We remember Roland Hazard. Roland has a slight drinking problem. In fact, it's a lot more than slight. Roland's awful. You know the awful ones? You know the ones who they just even start drinking and it goes sideways? And the Firestones, right? I mean, there's 4 families in town. There's the Cyberlings, the Firestones. But I mean, and this guy's landing in the papers weekly, Oh, honey, do you want to read sports, or you want to read what's happened to Russell Firestone? I got sidetracked, excuse me. Roland Hazard is the same kind of guy. He's an allergic type. And when he starts drinking, things go bad. So the family starts sending him around. They send him to sanitariums. They send him to exercise clinics. They, get him to read books and all that stuff. And all the money. These people got serious bread. Nothing. Nothing happens. So they're at wit's end. They don't know what to do with the boy. So a wonderful thing happens. There's this new thing called psychiatry. And there's this guy by the name of Carl Jung who has set up in Switzerland a clinic. So they send their son there with a blank check saying, fix him. So Roland is there for a year. A year. Now, while Roland's busy finding out about his own personal, peculiar mental twists, kind of this other allergic type, back in Akron, Harvey Firestone's second son, Russell, who everybody knew as Bud, is just having an awful time. Same kind of deal. They are not having any help at all. So Newton, because of his age and the way that Firestone had kind of let him in the family, was very, very close to Bud. And they decided, well, we're going to send Bud out. There's a new place on the Hudson River. We'll send him out there. So they send Bud out there, and they did the same thing there that they do out in Palm Desert now. Make you run around a lot, clean things, do your own laundry, all that kind of stuff. I mean, Bud Firestone's a guy with a lot of bucks. I mean, he's a star. Let's get this guy all fixed up, and everything will really help our little drying out for him. Jim Newton said, hey, let me go along with him. Let me have this experience so that maybe when it comes time where he wants to drink, that maybe I can share something with him or help him out. And Harvey allows, well, okay, we'll do that. So he goes up to this trying out spot. It works so well that Bud gets a bottle on his way out of the place. And they go back to Akron, and Jim's kind of at his wit's end. Now, Jim knows that his good friend, Sam Shoemaker, is going to be in Denver at a bishop's conference, an Episcopalian bishop's conference, and that there's going to be a lot of Oxford Group members there. So, he says to Russell, let's go. What's he got to lose? He goes up, and they hang out, and he hears about working these spiritual principles in his life and at the conference and all that. And then on the way out of town on the train, what happens is that Bud and Sam Shoemaker get together. And Sam gives him the instructions. Bud makes a decision for Christ, and his drink obsession is lifted. It's gone. It was such a remarkable thing that what they decided is that maybe he should go and hang out with a few Oxford Group members in New York. So he goes up there to continue working through the steps, and he gets to the restitution step, and he gets in touch with his father, and in December his father came out to visit. And when the family physician saw Bud, he called it a medical miracle that he'd stopped drinking. Because you know how it is when the really awful alcoholics get sober? You know how their faces change? And the story is that when Harvey came to this place in New York to visit his son, and it's like the prodigal, and he saw him a ways off, he barely recognized him because of the pain and resentment had drained from his face. Harvey was so amazed. Bud comes back to town, back to Akron, goes to work, is nice to his wife, shows up to work all the time, becomes a member of the family, makes amends to his father, and his father is absolutely stunned when he finds out about what it was that his son felt was blocking him from his father. And it changes his relationship with his other sons and his relationship with his business. And he starts to, speak with Jim Newton about these principles. And everybody in town is impressed. There's no more looking in the paper to see what stunt Bud pulled over the weekend. So he decides to get together with a few of the other families in town that have got dough, and they call for the Oxford Group to come in. They send a letter out to Buckman, and they say, would you please schedule a time that you can come to Akron, and we'll make arrangements and put you up and the like. And see, when you go back to who the Oxford Group was, it's a group of men and women with no hierarchy. They've got no money or anything. They go where they're invited or where they're led. And so they're going to come to, they're invited to Akron. Where are the steps? Are they coming? Now, about this time, our friend Roland has been first pronounced cured. And Carl Jung says to him, young man, I think you know yourself well enough. It's been great having you. Bye, go with God. He leaves Switzerland. He gets as far as Paris. In Paris, somebody offers him a drink. He takes a drink, and he's blotto, right? And the obsession returns, and he can't understand what's going on, and he gets devastated, and he goes back to the doctor. And he says, what's wrong with me? And Dr. Jung says, he said, number one, I had you wrong. I thought you were manic depressive. You didn't drink anything while you were here, so I thought that you, he says, you're hopeless. I've never seen anybody like you ever recover. That's it. And Roland is not from a family that's used to know. There's got to be a way to buy my way out of it. There's got to be something that I can do. He goes, what can I do? And, Jung says, well, here and there are people who have a spiritual experience, that they have a complete reorganization of their attitude and outlook upon life. And what happens is that they don't drink anymore. But he said, it's a phenomenon. It rarely happens. What you probably need is a bodyguard that'll beat you up anytime that you go for a drink, or you're just going to have to institutionalize yourself. I can't help you. The only thing I can suggest is, if you can, surround yourself with some religious people and just hope that the lightning hits you. But, that's about the chance you got. Same as lightning hitting you. And so Roland's devastated, and he starts home to New York. The Oxford group believed that in order to change the most amount of lives, what you needed to do was you start at the top. If you change the king, if you change the president of the company, if you change the prime minister, if you change the foreign minister, you'll affect more change than you will if you start down below. So what happened is that there's a lot of people by 1932. There's a lot of folks that have had life-changing experiences through the Oxford group. And again, this is not a religion. Its goal is, their own self-stated goal is by bringing people to practice Christian principles, that what they would do is that they would strengthen all of their primary loyalties. That anything that it was that you were into, your marriage, your family, your community, whatever, that by working their steps, that what you do is that all who you were would be strengthened. Roland comes back to New York. He goes to the family church, which happens to be Calvary Chapel, and he gets involved with the Reverend Sam Shoemaker, who loves nothing better than to take somebody and help them change their lives. And so he does what it is that Sam recommends, and his obsession to drink is removed. Next, we'll move to Akron. Back to Akron. This is kind of a bipolar presentation. Yeah. Thank God you're drunks. You can follow this kind of stuff, Of course, the Al-Anons are probably even better at it. January 19th, 1933. Frank Buckman, V.C. Kitchen, Roland Hazard, and I think there was a group of, can't remember how many exactly. I think it was 20 Oxford groupers show up. And they're put into the Mayflower Park Hotel, which had a great restaurant and bar, which on a personal note were owned and operated by my fabulous wife Adele's great-grandfather.
Wow.
It's a miracle.
I sleep as close to the miracle as I can get.
But not a coincidence.
Yes, not a coincidence, that's right. So Buckman shows up, and what happens is that the Firestone family church, the Episcopalian minister, the Reverend Walter Tunks, is in charge of, I think this is him right here, of welcoming him and the folks to the town. And since the Oxford group wasn't a religion and it wasn't in competition, what would happen is that the ministerial association would all step off their pulpits on Sundays and see, since it was Lutherans and it was Episcopalians and it was Methodists and it was this kind of people and that kind of people, they would get up and preach. People that were of that primary loyalty would get up and talk about their lives being changed in church on Sunday. And so that's what happened is that the group came to Akron, and the people who attended this were T. Henry Williams and his wife Clarice, Anne and her husband Bob Smith, and they got lit up. I mean, can you imagine? More than 1,600 people attended this conference in Akron. I'm sorry. Roland has gotten so involved that he now has become part of the Oxford Group Businessmen's team and is starting to go. One of the things that Frank always believed is that the people that were closest to the flame, those who've been converted most recently, are the ones who have the best message. And you know, there's nothing like that first birthday cake. There's nothing like that first 30-day chip when you hear somebody that's gotten it. You know, it's really that the lights have come on. Okay, now what I'd like to do is talk about how the lights came on, and just quickly run through how it is that this life-changing process happened. Again, the Oxford Group believed that first and foremost that the sharing of our sins and temptations with another Christian life given to God, and to use sharing as witness to help others, still unchanged, to recognize and acknowledge their sins. In other words, what they said is, first, you clean the channel. First, you clean the channel. And so their sharing, or in the 5 C's, they called it their confession. We'd call our fearless and thorough moral inventory our 4th and 5th step. Second, they believed that after doing that a person then could actually turn their will and their lives over to the care of God. So their 3rd step came after they were cleaned up. The surrender of our life, past, present, and future, into God's keeping and direction. Third, and this is the way that people truly changed, was from going out and making amends. Restitution. And we all know the difference between the folks who are on the saloon side of the 9th step and the ones who are either in it or through it. Their lives change, just as it says in our book. And fourth, the listening to, accepting and relying on God's guidance and carrying it out in everything we do or say, great or small. This is practical living. This is the message that they carried. That if you do these things, religion doesn't become something that you just kind of do. You do these things, and when you go to church on Sunday, you're going to hear something different. When you go home, there's going to be something different that goes on. When you go to work, it's going to be a different experience every day if you do these things. And what happened is that everywhere they went, people did these things and their lives changed. That's it. Yeah, next one, please. Now, this is exactly what happened in Akron. There were some people whose lives changed. And for a while they met in the Mayflower Park Hotel, but after, as it with any movement, things start to mellow out a little bit, and the numbers start to drop. They get the big rally going, and so what happened is they moved out of the Mayflower Hotel, and they went into the home of T. Henry and Clarice Williams. T. Henry and Clarice he's got this mold business, and things are going along fabulously. He's got this house that he's remodeling, and he's in the midst of the remodel, and the depression hits him. And his finances are running dry, and he and Clarice decide that what they need to do is they need to give their home to God. And either it's going to be theirs or it's not going to be theirs, but the home's God's, so we'll let God do with it what God wants. So they invite the group to come to the house. And one of the people that show up, who are they? Aside from some other folks in town, it's Bob Smith and Ann Smith and Henrietta. And they're there all the time. And the format of the meeting is that on Monday, there'd be a steering committee meeting. And at the steering committee meeting, the members of the steering committee meeting, which were all attendees that were interested, would get together and they would have quiet time. And amongst them, during the meditation, they would wait until somebody would speak someone's name who they were led to believe should lead the meeting on Wednesday night. And so it's Jeannie. And Jeannie, what we'd like you to do is we're working through Corinthians, so what we'd like you to do is look at the 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter and the 5th verse the next couple of days, and we want you to pray upon it and then share with us your experience about how that is real in your life today. And on Wednesday, the group would show up, and Jeannie, after their quiet time together, Jeannie would then get up and give her pitch about that particular passage, what it meant to her, what she used to be like, what happened, what she may be like now. Not so much a long form of the story, but maybe about how this particular principle worked in her life, or if there was some situation where she had to make restitution and how she felt that God led her during the course of the week. And then they'd go around the room and share about any spiritual experiences that they'd had with their guidance. And one of the things about this quiet time is that they recommended that every person, when they have their meditation, keep a notepad and a pencil so that they could write it down, what they believed needed to be done, so they'd remember to do it. And so what happens is that they could, I don't know about you, but I may have a feeling about somebody or something on Wednesday in the shower, and I may actually remember to do something about it Saturday, but there might not be the connection that it actually came across my heart. That it wasn't my idea, that something had come across my heart, and then I went through with it. So anyway, so you got Bob and Ann and Henrietta and T. Henry and Clarice and the other members of the community that are showing up at this West Hills Oxford group meeting on Wednesday nights. Same time, there's this Oxford group businessmen's group that's kind of been commissioned, and what they're going to do is they're going to tackle American business and show how Christian principles operating in business will allow you to be more successful, make more money, have better workers, and how everything will work out fine if you do these things. And on this team, there's some real hitters that happen to have had drinking problems. And they're Roland Hazard, Shep Cornell, Bud Firestone, Sebra Graves. And then most of the group was not people that had a drinking problem, of course, but I put up here our friend Jim Newton and T. Henry Williams. And they would actually go out, and people from New York and Akron would meet in another community, and they would get up and talk about principles. One of the 5 C's is constancy. And what happens is that in that you're to be continuing to work these principles and demonstrate them. And so what they do is that there's the big group that's come through with Buckman, and now a year later we've got another group that comes through, and Roland Hazard's in this group, and V.C. Kitchen's in this group, and they come to Akron. We're not sure, but we know that Shoemaker left with a group of 20 from New York, and that they went to Detroit, and they went to Chicago, and other members from the Calvary Chapel's bulletin, other members went on to Akron. And whether or not Sam Shoemaker actually went or not, we don't know. But we know that he was part of that team that went out. So these people go to Akron, and where are they going to end up? They're going to end up at T. Henry's house. And who are they going to be talking to? Bob and Ann, Henrietta. So these folks are all getting to know each other. Whether Sam was there or not, we know that Sam was there in another way, because he was recommended. He was the most prolific author of Oxford Group material, and my loving sponsor loaned me his copy because he really desperately needed this. Soul Surgery, another great title, by H.A. Walter. And in the back, there's a list of recommended Oxford Group reading, including For Sinners Only by A.J. Russell, and Life Changers by Harold Begbie, Soul Surgery, this one, The Guidance of God by Eleanor Ford, who later married Jim Newton, Sherman Day's The Principles of the Oxford Group, and then there's Twice Born Ministers, Religion That Works, If I Be Lifted Up, Confident Faith, and Realizing Religion by the Reverend S. M. Shoemaker. And the following books and pamphlets give information about the Oxford Group, and they can be obtained by forwarding, remittance, and cost of postage to blah, blah, blah. And, but anyway, so Sam's concepts are there. Even if the man isn't there, not only are his concepts there, but the people that he's been working with, the man who these people have all worked steps with, you know, their spiritual mentor, is either with him or he's back in New York. The Hazards have a home in Manchester, and and it gets pretty muggy, as you know, in New York. And so what happens is the guys go out there. Now, what Roland's done is that he's made this a little Oxford Group retreat place. So the gang can get out of the city and go up, and it can be nice and cool, and they can enjoy the time together, and they can work on, you know, share on spiritual principles, have lots of meetings together and all that. My friend Ray O'Keefe says it was a hippie community. So anyway, they're up there, and Sebra Graves, who's a member, Roland, Sebra, and Shep are all hanging out with other folks at the Hazard home. Sebra Graves' uncle is a judge in Manchester. And they got this problem in Manchester. There's this guy from a good family in Albany. They've asked him to leave Albany. And he's living year-round in the family summer home in Manchester. And his name's Ebby. And Ebby has gotten in trouble. The last scrape he got in was that he drove his car into a living room at a farmhouse while the woman was making dinner. I mean, the car goes into the kitchen. And he opens the door and he looks out and he says, "I'd like a cup of coffee, please." I'll steal this line from Ray. He says, "Vermonters are not known for their sense of humor." And he was forthwith reported and sent to jail. Now, he's in jail. He goes before the judge, Seb's uncle. He gives him the speech, you know, "If I see you in here one more time," you know, that one. What happens? He's not going to drink. And he goes home. And it's summertime, and he gets an idea that with a little determination, he'll do something good. So he's going to paint the house. And he starts painting the house. And he gets about 6 feet done of it all the way around because he's a little bit too shaky to get on the ladder. And the way I've heard the story is there's a case of beer on the stairs, and he keeps walking back and forth and past it. And he comes up, and he's looking out, and some birds have made a deposit on the paint job. And so his solution, a couple bottles, a beach chair, and a shotgun. And he starts taking pot, you know, drinking and taking pot shots at the pigeons, right? That's going to solve the problem. Huh? Even in resort communities, they don't go for this stuff. And so they go in and they sweep him up, and they throw him in the can, and they're going to sentence him for being, I love this line, a chronic inebriate. And he's going to spend a year in the can for being a chronic inebriate. There's one right back there if you want. So, Seb's uncle, somehow the word gets to Seb, Seb says to Roland, he says, well, he's really in a jam this time. And the boys have already made one pass by him and talked to him about, come with us, find Jesus. Using the old Bill scene, like, take my hand, I'll save your life. And what happens is that they go down and they show up on trial day, and Abby's brought out and taken to the dock, and the boys stand up and they say, give him to us. We can help him. And then they say the magic words, we'll get him out of here. We'll take him back to New York with us. He goes, great, get him out of the courtroom, get him out of town, get him out of the state. We don't want to see him, get him gone. And so Abby goes to New York with the boys. And they take him down to the Calvary Mission, and he's there, and he's going to these men's meetings, and one of the people whose things I've read is a man by the name of Garrett Steerley, who was the assistant rector at Calvary Church, who has filled in a bunch of the blanks about who was where and what exactly was going on. And he said that he was in the meeting where Abby made his decision for Christ. And you know what happens? His obsession to drink's removed when he works through the steps with Sam and Roland. And after he gets done doing whatever restitution he was doing, he's got to do his quiet time, right? The boys are all doing quiet time. You're going to be part of the team, man. You got to do your quiet time. And he's sitting there doing his quiet time, and what comes across his heart? What guidance, as they used to call it, does he receive? Go see Bill. So he says to Roland, what about Bill? Roland says, go get him. Go get him, man. So, we know from our book what happens. Phone call comes. There's gin, there's fruit juice. Eddie's coming to the house. Party's on. The only reason we're going to even mess with the pineapple juice is because we know that Eddie's got a sour stomach from drinking. And so Eddie comes by, and he says that he's got religion. And Bill, kicks him out of the house as quickly as he can. But not before Eddie has shared the things that Sam Shoemaker has taught him. Like, what you do is you take as much as you know about yourself, and you give that to as much of God as you know about God. God as you understand God. We talk about Jesus in our meetings, but the only thing they know, these people know for a fact, from their own practical experience, that if any man or woman goes through those steps, what's going to happen is that they're going to get a knowledge of God. And it doesn't matter how much you know when you start, because it's going to grow. So what happens, Bill kicks Abby out, and he can't get it out of his mind. And Bill was an insurance investigator at one point, so he starts drinking and thinking. And as we all know, you can drink or you can think, but don't think and drink at the same time. And what he decides is that he really can't stomach this Jesus stuff. So he's going to go down and check out the Oxford group, see what it is they got that works, and, figure it out for himself. So on the 8th of December, we believe, or it might be the 7th, it might be the 9th, but somewhere right in there, he decides to go down to check out the Oxford group. He convinces Lois that this is what he ought to do. And so they clean him up and they put him in his Brooks Brothers suit, and she gives him a couple of bucks. Bad move. Bad move. She gives him a couple of bucks, and she sends him downtown to do his investigating of the Oxford group. He's going to find out what these guys are really up to. Now, he just happens to get on the wrong train. And he ends up in Manhattan, and he's got to take a really long walk across the island. So he starts, but he's got time, so he starts walking. And as he's walking, he starts looking in saloon windows. just to see if there might be somebody he knows. And he keeps passing all these places, and there isn't anybody he knows. So he's getting pretty close to where the Calvary Chapel is, so he decides that he ought to go into one and just, wait to see if maybe somebody might come by. And of course, if you're in a bar, you really don't want to look suspicious, do you? So we should have a beer. So he starts drinking. But it's only beer. As we all know, beer's a food, a beverage, it's not drinking. He gets pie-eyed, runs across a fisherman, and the Finn, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but anyway, he decides, just like you do when you're kind of in a jam and you're going home to your wife, you take your new best friend from the bar, just to take the first salvo so you can survive the second, and, human shield. And so he takes this guy along, and they get down there, and they've had too much to drink. They're at the Calvary Mission. Excuse me, they were going down to the mission. And this guy, Tex Francisco, who's an ex-drunk, is working the hinge, and he goes, "Nah, you guys aren't coming in." And Bill starts going about, "Well, we know that you can help and all that stuff, and I brought my friend all the way." And as Bill describes it, "I was getting ready for my customary beating." And Emmy shows up, and Emmy says, "Don't worry, Tex, I'll sponsor these guys. Let me take them in, and I'll make sure they're okay." And he gets them in there, gets some beans and some coffee in them, and it's an Oxford group meeting. And guys are getting up, and they're talking about what it used to be like, what happened, what it's like now, the power of Jesus in his life, what happens if you go out and make restitution in your life, what happens if you give your heart and mind to guidance. And all of a sudden, here's our boy Bill, up like a shot, going down the aisle. Now, just, let's compare it to, say, one of the smaller meetings in the big room here, right? And you got the guy at the podium holding forth, and this person's coming down to witness. And everybody's trying to stop him because he's drunk. Bill says he was in a blackout. He doesn't remember any of this. I've had some morning afters where I've claimed that, so we can, but we'll take the man at his word. And what he says is that he got up there and he was jumping for Jesus and singing old camp songs and talking about the effects of demon rum. And he gives his life to Jesus. And Helen Shoemaker was there. And Garrett Steele, a bunch of folks, Shep Cornell, Tex Francisco, Eddie's there. Bill gives his life to Jesus, and he splits. The next day, he's absolutely aghast because he can remember pieces of this, and he's absolutely convinced that the next time he goes down to Wall Street and asks somebody to put him to work, what's going to happen is they're going to say, "Oh yeah, we remember you. Yeah, God, that was a great rendition you did of, Michael, row your boat ashore down at the mission." He's just horribly depressed and he can't believe it. And he just keeps drinking and thinking about what it is that his buddy, who he knows drank like he drank. And he's not drinking like that anymore. And even though he can't, he decides maybe he's really going to give this thing a ride. So what he does is he goes back to the town's hospital for the 6th time. And he walks in, and of course we know the story of him holding a bottle over his head and saying, "Hey doc, I got the answer," and so forth. Says, "You upstairs." And so he enters the hospital, and while he's there, all this stuff starts rolling through his mind. Ebby comes down in the midst of a blizzard. And he visits Bill, and he says, "God, I really thought you had it, man. I thought you got it. You were there. The words that you were carrying, they rang like a bell. But here you are. If you ever really want help, let me know." And Bill says, "Well, tell me again about those 4 things." We got honest with ourselves and another person. We surrendered to whatever God we understood. We made restitution, and then we did our best to follow God's guidance. And Eddie splits. And Bill has been given the chronic inebriate sentence already. He knows that the last time he left, that it was suggested that if he drank again, that he was going to be thrown away for good. And of course, what happens? Bill has the spiritual experience. The same spiritual experience that S.H. Adley talks about in the varieties of religious experience. That's where he got hooked. Was exactly what happened to him was in that book. And in fact, he says it was the cash value of his experience. He could see it. There's also another book from the same time by Charles Clapp Jr., who got sober in October of 34, called The Big Bender. And it's the same thing. The light comes and the obsession to drink is removed. So Bill's released from Town's hospital. He's not drunk. And where does he go? Where his buddies are. He goes to Calvary Chapel. And there he starts to go to, he and Lois were going to 2 to 3 Oxford group meetings a week. And he starts to go through these steps, these spiritual concepts, with Sam Shoemaker and the rest of the group. Bill is not a unknown quantity. They want him. His membership has value. When people mention Bill Wilson, folks in the financial community around Wall Street know who they're talking about, because he was a guy who actually came up with this whole thing of using insurance investigating principles in investigating companies to see whether or not the stocks were valued right or whether you should invest in a company or not. And so the gang all knows about him. So they put him with this businessman's team. And he's running around with the hitters. You know, and they're going out. But every time Bill goes to a meeting, what he says to folks is, you got any drunks here? I want drunks. I need to talk to drunks. Do you have any drunks here? And he's got this obsession to talk to other alcoholics. In fact, it's so overwhelming that he's really irritating. You know, all right, guys, we're going out today. We're going down to J.P. Morgan's company, and we're going to talk about demonstrating spiritual principles in business. Who's with me? You know, and they all go down, and Bill goes with them. And what does Bill want to do? He wants to talk about drunks. Now, in those days, the best you could be was called being maximum in the Oxford group. And what maximum meant was following God's guidance in everything you did, you said, no matter how great or how small, to bring effective change in other people. And Bill is not being maximum. He's a pain in the ass. Now we'll get bipolar again. It's April 1935, and at the steering committee meeting, an Oxford group meeting, the West Hills group, Henrietta receives guidance that Dr. Bob should not touch any liquor whatsoever. Bob's really started to get bad. I mean, when he showed up at the meetings 2.5 years ago, Anne is despondent. She doesn't know what to do. But after going to the Oxford group meetings at the Mayflower Hotel, she believes that she might be able to find some help. And she's going to these meetings, and Bob's coming along. But as he said, I was getting tight every night. And Henrietta and Anne were very close. And Henrietta has made Bob, or Anne's, their family problem, as she described it, her own personal prayer project. And one day in her quiet time, what comes is, the voice is very, very loud and very strong to her. Don't worry, I will send someone. Now, it's the last week in April. Henrietta has been made the chairman for the next few meetings. And she says, at our next meeting, I want everybody to come and be prepared to share something costly. And they go around the room and people talk about beating the kids, kicking the dog, padding the expense account, you know, maybe a little infidelity. Who knows? And it gets around to Bob, and Bob says, I'm a closet drinker. And everybody knew that. My God! He's doing the St. Vitus dance every night with the meetings, But it's the first time that he's ever acknowledged it. And T. Henry looks across and he says, do you want our help? And Bob says, yes. And he says, would you like us to pray with you? And Bob gets down on his knees, and the group gets down, and they pray for Jesus to send someone or some way for their friend to find a way out of his problem. That week, there was a proxy battle going for the National Rubber Manufacturing Company, and a guy by the name of Bill Wilson was part of the team because of his ability to quickly take a look at books and kind of figure out how a business was working. He was part of the deal. In fact, if this thing comes out right, he's going to be made president of the company. Lois is out of the department store. Things are going to be good again. And he arrives in Akron and is staying at my lovely wife's great-grandfather's place of business, and so he's in town. They think they've got all the votes counted. They know it's going to work. They're ready for it. But unbeknownst to them, the management team from the firm has gotten together with a few of the workers, and they've got enough votes, and it doesn't go their way. And they're standing there, and they're devastated. And they, okay, so we've lost. And it's Friday, and Mother's Day is coming up, so the gang goes back, and Bill says, look, he does not want to go back a failure. I'm not going to go back with my head out. This is my chance. He says, let me hang out for a few days, find out if there was any problems, if they maybe bought a few votes or something. Maybe we can actually run this thing out of ways and see whether or not, something wrong was done. And if it is, then we can come back and make this takeover work. And the guys say, fine, you can stay. The hotel's paid up for a few days. And so it's now Saturday, and he's got $10 in his pocket, and as he was wont to say, for $10 you could be king in Akron. and he's got $10, and he's the way he described it is he's pacing the floor, walking for Monday. And those of us who've made that walk know how long that walk is. And he hears the folks in the bar, and the glasses are clinking, and the dollies are giggling, and he goes, well, maybe I can go in and have a ginger ale and strike up an acquaintance with somebody, maybe find a person who understands, and maybe something good will happen. And he starts going for the bar, and he remembers that on Armistice Day he went into one bar and had a ginger ale, but when he went into the second one and had a ginger ale, what he ended up doing was having a drink. And he realizes, oh my God, I need a drink. I'm on my way to get drunk. So he goes and he takes a look at the church directory, and he goes through it, and he's looking, and he liked strange names. And when he was a kid in Vermont, when he went on a walk in the woods, you went on a tunk, and he sees this name, Walter Tunks. It's an Episcopalian minister. Probably a good bet this guy knows a little bit about the Oxford group. So he calls him. And he says, do you know anybody? Do you know an alcoholic? And he goes, well, he says, I'm not real hep with putting two alcoholics together. I know a bad idea when I hear one, and this is not my idea of a really good. And he says, besides, I'm a professional. I can't disclose to you even if I knew somebody. He said, but here's the members of the Oxford group, the West Hills group, and you can call them up. And so Bill goes and he gets $1 worth of nickels, and he starts dropping the nickels, calling around, and everybody's off and doing this and that, and he gets a hold of one guy who's on his way to get on a train to New York, and he says, call this number. Call Henrietta Cyberling. And Bill's stomach drops through his socks. Because he knows the Cyberlings. He and Jim Cyberling were members of the same clubs in New York. What's he going to do? Call up and say, oh, hey, Jim. He thinks Henrietta's Jim's wife. He says, oh, Jim, it's Bill Wilson. You remember me from New York. I'm an alcoholic now, and I'm desperate. You know any drunks I can talk to? And, but what happens is he goes, and he's walking across the lobby, and the voice, the guidance that he'd been getting, see, he'd been doing his quiet time. He'd worked these steps. His heart was open, his mind was open, and he's walking back across the lobby, and he heard the voice, and the voice said, make the call, dummy. And he did. And he goes, and he calls Henrietta, who, when she answers the phone, and Bill says, I'm a rum hound from New York, and I can fix drunks. Do you know any? She says, you're manna from heaven. She says, get over here, right now. And she wanted to interview him to make sure that he really knew something about the drinking game. Bill said he'd never had anybody he'd spent all his life denying that he was a drunk. And here's this woman who wants to know, So this woman wasn't out of some Christian kindness going, oh yes, we might be able to help you. No, she went, you're here. And she called her friend Annie after she talked to Bill, and she said, Annie, he's here. The one who was foretold to me. And this group of people, this West Hills group, the Oxford group, had been waiting for him in faith. And so Anne says, well, I'd love to bring him over, but he's upstairs and he's passed out and I can't move him. We'll be by tomorrow. And what happened? The next day, Bob says, I'll give this guy from Vermont 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and that's it. That's tops. And after that, we'll get out of here, and if I'm still talking to him, act like there's a train wreck or something that happened, and there's emergency proctology that needs to be practiced. This is how Bob describes the people. About the time of the beer experiment, this is April, I was thrown in with a crowd of people who attracted me because of their seeming poise, health, and happiness. They spoke with great freedom from embarrassment, which I never could do. And they seemed very much at ease on all occasions and appeared very healthy. I was self-conscious and ill at ease most of the time. My health was at the breaking point, and I was thoroughly miserable. I sensed they had something I did not have from which I could readily profit. And I learned that it was something of a spiritual nature, which did not appeal to me very much, but I thought it could do no harm. I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years. So, I'm sorry, this is him describing what happened after he and Ann started going to the meetings in 33. But still got tight every night, nevertheless. I read everything I could find, and I talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it. My wife became deeply interested, and it was her interest that sustained mine, though at no time did I sense that it might be an answer to my liquor problem. How my wife kept her faith and courage during all those years, I'll never know, but she did. If she'd not, I know that I would have been dead a long time ago. For some reason, we alcoholics seem to have a gift of picking out the world's finest women. Why they should be subjected to the tortures we inflict upon them, I cannot explain. About this time, a lady called up my wife one Saturday afternoon saying she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. It was the day before Mother's Day, and I'd come home plastered, carrying a big potted plant, which I set on the table, and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. The next day she called again, wishing to be polite, though I felt very badly. I said, let's make the call, and extracted from my wife a promise that we would not stay over the 15 minutes. We entered her house at exactly 5 o'clock. It was 11:15 when we left. I had a couple of shorter talks with this gentleman afterwards, and I stopped drinking abruptly. What happened is that he and Bill got together, and they did what the Oxford group called sharing. And then he made his surrender. But Bob wouldn't make amends. He said, I can't do that. I'm a surgeon. It's not going to work. I'm not going to go to these people and tell them that I'm a bad drunk. So, I can't do this. And a couple of days later, he gets the good idea, and he's got to go to Atlanta to the AMA commit. And he got drunk. And he got drunk. And when he came back from that drunk, and Bill gave him the bottle of beer to settle him out, he says, Bill came and got me home into bed, and he gave me a few drinks that night. And one bottle of beer the next morning. That was June 10th, 1935, and that was my last drink. As I write this, 4 years have passed. Later on, he goes on to say that if you think you're an atheist and agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you still think you're strong enough to beat the game alone, that's your affair. But if you really and truly want to stop drinking liquor for good and for all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer for you. It never fails. If you go about it with 1/2 of the zeal you were used to showing when you were getting your next drink, your Heavenly Father will never let you down. Thank you.